Hey everyone, normally we talk about bigger case studies here on this channel, brands spending $50,000, $100,000 per month or more. But today I want to take one step back and talk about a brand that we helped scale from zero on Google to now about $40,000 a month and growing rapidly. I think this is maybe a brand that many of you can sort of align with if you're just starting out or if you have like a smaller business. These guys already had existing sales on Amazon, but they wanted to break free from it and have like their own marketing and sales channel as well, which is where we came in and, as I said, helped them to grow to about 50,000 in just under 2 months now. So without any further ado, let's dive right into it and I will tell you in 3 phases what we have been doing with this brand so far to hit that $40,000 milestone. The first step is the foundation, and actually the best part about this whole case study is that we only needed shopping and search to get there. So you don't need fancy assets, you don't need to create a crazy YouTube or demand gen campaign or something like that. This is purely with shopping and search, and I think that is very, very important to know. So the very first thing that we did is we implemented full-scale server-side tracking. You know, many brands out there, they use normal tracking, they have some issues with it, they only get 90% of the or 95% of the orders right, and this may sound like, you know, good enough, but if you manage to track literally 98, 99% or 99.9% of sales, then you can fuel more conversions back into the system, and that gave us a great start. Next up, we did a research of all our competitors. These guys sell car parts, you know, replacement parts and all kinds of, you know, related accessories for cars. And we did a research of their immediate competitors. We had a look at what they do in terms of their product feeds. We noticed that many of them had very generic titles, generic descriptions, super long but not very descriptive. So what we did is we positioned ourselves in that niche because we do not sell like 10,000 SKUs or something. We handcrafted many of the best sellers, right? We put a lot of effort into those products that were proven to sell well on Amazon. And then for the other products, we just came up with like some generic structure that we used, you know, material, color, etc. But this mix of like saving time on the large set of products while at the same time, you know, manually optimizing their best sellers on Amazon, like the top 25 or something, gave us great results on shopping so far. And immediately we had like decent click-through rates, good traffic, even though we had low bids, and that gave us a head start as well. Speaking of shopping, of course, this is the lowest hanging fruit for almost any e-commerce store, and so it was here as well. So we got the first shopping campaign launched with all products, as I always recommend. And once traffic came in, we started segmenting, right? We started segmenting by margin, by car brand. We went ahead and did, of course, ongoing negative keyword research, which we have done quite a lot of now that helps us really refine the traffic. Also, our main campaign is now running on target ROAS. It was running on manual CPC for a very long time, which again, I always recommend in the beginning as well. We had like the option to then bid more on the products that were selling very well and less on the others and so on and so forth. But at a certain time, you know, let's say when you always say like 30 to 50 conversions a month, and that roughly fits my experience as well, then it usually makes sense to switch to target ROAS. So that is exactly what we did as well. After we had about something along those lines, right, 30 to 50 conversions a month, we switched to target ROAS, definitely in our first month already. And since then, I would say performance increased just by this change, you know, by 20 to 30% already, which is why we absolutely keep it and why I highly recommend that you do the same. What we also did fairly early was to prepare some search ads. So what we do is we target their car brands, right? So they sell accessories for Tesla, for, you know, Ford, for a bunch of other models, for a bunch of other brands, and so on and so forth. And we built a full-scale search campaign with all the brands, of course, the ones that tend to, again, perform best on Amazon here. We gave them a harder push in terms of the CPC bid, but we made sure that we advertised their entire catalog in some way on search. Of course, products that, you know, sell very, very little or that have tiny, tiny margins, we didn't include here. So that is also one big takeaway. Don't just mindlessly always advertise everything that you have all the time. On shopping, this makes sense to some degree, but even here, if you know that some products will never be profitable and they are not being purchased alongside other products to boost AOV, then you can actually avoid them. And that we did here on search as well. So we focused on their key product line and some minor other products, again, structured by a brand, etc. And very early on, we learned that some brands just don't perform at all and others perform better. So that is something that I will discuss right now in the second step. Step 2 is optimization. So after the foundation was in place, which probably took 3 weeks or something, right? Campaigns, we got sales, feed is optimized, tracking, some retargeting setup that we started to implement. All those things were in place. We made some sales already and everything. Now it's time to optimize, and now it's time to tweak, which is roughly when there was the transition from manual CPC to target ROAS, which I just talked about as well, right? And what we did now is we further subdivided products, because after about 3 weeks of data, of course, you have, as I mentioned, products, categories, subcategories that perform much better than others. So for the first time, we were now also excluding products entirely from shopping, from the ones that we were previously advertising, okay? So think brands, subcategories, etc. It very rarely makes sense to hunt for individual products if you have a lot of them. So this brand here doesn't have like 10,000 SKUs, but we definitely have more than 1,000, right? So going ahead and manually excluding products, searching for products that don't perform, makes sense if you spend a lot per product, right? But if you don't, like we do, $10 here, $20 there, $5 here, it doesn't really make sense. So what you have to do instead is you have to find like the common ground here. Is it a category that isn't performing? Is it a product type? Is it a brand? Is it a margin level that you just cannot get to a decent, ROAS? Something along those lines. That's how you find those categories and products and types of products that you should exclude, rather than what I see a lot, when we do an audit of an existing account, which happens about 4 times a week at the moment. I very often see that people have excluded a bunch of individual products. And even when I go to lifetime spend, I see like $17 in spend or something. And when I ask the brand owner or the ad manager, depending on who ran the account, they were like, yeah, that is actually our break-even point, or we just saw that the CPC wasn't that great, so we excluded it. But they kept others that were ultra similar, just didn't spend as much, right? Think like the same variation, but a tiny, tiny little nuance that no one noticed. So you have to think a little bit bigger here. And especially in the beginning, when budget is finite, when you want to really find the best products and focus on them because you cannot afford to lose anything, you have to, go sort of one step beyond and really think about, which products should we exclude in their entirety, in their category, etc. And that's also very important, because the optimization phase and then the scaling phase, those are the phases where many DIY attempts fail. So when store owners try to do it themselves, or when they have an in-house manager that is specialized on Facebook and just treats Google ads on the side every 2-3 weeks or something a little bit, that is where it gets really hard when you want to get the maximum out of Google, because Google is very sort of misleading in a way. It can run on autopilot to some degree in a decently profitable state, but it will never truly grow that way. It will never get to a crazy high ROAS level. It will never get to a crazy high volume level if you are not sort of actively trying to push the boundaries all the time. And that's what we noticed here, especially when we were seeing, very fast growth compared to the other channels that they are using, or when they tried Google Ads back then, many months ago, right? So they had a start, never really sold using Google, and now was like the relaunch in that sense. Some things that we learned here as well is that some of the best performing products now, as I said before, were not the best sellers on Amazon. So takeaway here, if you have existing sales but on other channels, yes, it makes sense to test these products in the beginning because you have to start somewhere. But if you then notice that they're just not performing on Google, and I mean, there could be many reasons for it, right? Different kind of customer, different level of buying intent, more comparison or less comparison, depending on what the competition looks like on shopping. Then you might at some point say, okay, it works on Amazon or it works on Facebook or whatever, but we give up on it here on Google. And you then just focus on that. When we talk about the search ads, there were 3 types of ad groups / keywords. They were the ones that were just not performing at all. Some car brands, for whatever reason, don't work at all. We paused them entirely, right? Then there were the ones that were doing okay. They were not breaking even really. Like our average ROAS is in the 3 to 4x range here, right? So there were some sort of ad groups that were not really profitable. They were not breaking even, but they showed some promising, performance. They were getting some sales, which is, not that common in a new search ad for a new brand, at least new on Google here in that sense, that is not a branded search campaign. So we thought, okay, we have to double down on that. And for that ad group and for these keywords that were like in the middle, we, basically wrote new ad copy, tried a different angle, sometimes tried sending people to a different URL, came up with a different set of keywords, reworked some of the extensions or assets as they are now called, and actually that gave many of them a pretty strong push, right? Afterwards, some again fell then into the category of, okay, they're just not we cannot get them to perform, at least in this stage, so we turned them off as well. But basically we had this bad performers, we turned them off, these medium performers which we optimized, and then some of them were doing very well and others had to be turned off as well. And then of course, you might have guessed it, we had some ad groups, some car brands, etc. that were doing very well. We scaled them by assigning higher CPCs to those specifically, so that of course we tell Google, hey, that's working, because again, that's a manual CPC campaign, the search one, and therefore Google pushed those best-selling products more, and that's what we're now being focused on as well. So the shopping campaigns are really growing. Now we have to, do some more manual work on search so that we can get it to a similar level here as well, because right now the shopping campaign, as you might have guessed, is carrying the account a little bit. Another thing that we started to implement here after 3 to 4 weeks is dynamic search. Dynamic search is very sort of underutilized in my opinion, especially if you have a store with like a few hundred or a few thousand products. Basically, the more the better. Dynamic search makes a lot of sense because it can target your entire store. You should still tailor your ads, right? Your ad copy in terms of the descriptions, because the headlines are dynamically generated, but you can target individual categories of your site or even URL substrings or something like that, and then manually craft the descriptions for this ad. If you do that, you get a lot of relevance and you can let Google do the heavy lifting for you. But disclaimer here, you have to put a lot of effort into sort of removing URLs that you don't want to advertise. Otherwise, you might get a lot of traffic to some review pages, to some blog pages, or something that's not directly sort of useful. One example here is we were getting a lot of traffic, both actually in the brand campaign as well as in the DSA, especially for people searching for things like guide, installation, manual, PDF, etc., which indicates they had already bought one of our products. Now they wanted to learn how to actually install or use it. And we were spending some money, of course, we turned that off very quickly, but we were spending some money on those things, then realizing, wait a second, that makes no sense, right? So when you run dynamic search, which I highly recommend, you have to be on top of your negative keyword game, of your refinement, and also of making sure that some landing pages that don't make sense are being excluded. And then, honestly, dynamic search can work wonders. Now the last step, or the last phase, number 3, the scaling blueprint. Because the exciting part here is that we still have a fairly low search impression share on shopping and search, right? So I don't foresee that we have to jump into, demand gen, display, YouTube, or some very crazy out of range tactics anytime soon. My guess is that we can probably scale to somewhere close to 100,000, because before we have to really think about, next level search strategies or a much more complex shopping setup or something like that. Maybe a bit earlier than that, I'm not quite sure, but right now we're on a good trajectory, and I think that's, of course, what we all want, right? Search and shopping campaigns that are scalable so that you don't have to spend a lot of money and time on something like a demand gen campaign, because it takes a while before you can get some profitable sales from those campaigns typically. So the first thing here in terms of shopping is, of course, we want to scale our shopping campaign as much as we can. We currently have a target ROAS target. If we remove it, then the campaign tanks in terms of ROAS pretty quickly. So we're not there yet where we can let Google do all the bidding stuff by just running on max conversion value. So we have to further refine the campaign, remove categories, remove brands. Also, something that we are doing now is we set up a catch-all shopping campaign to get some of the leftovers, basically, because the main campaign is now very focused on that ROAS goal that we sort of assigned to it, which means that some keywords, or some search queries rather, are not being sort of used in that campaign. So we launched that catch-all campaign to grab some of the leftovers, which makes sense at a point where your campaign is actually doing well, but it has a target and cannot just attract every single person. Now we have the second campaign with a lower CPC bid, and that actually gets us some additional sales as well. Not as many, but definitely some that are pretty profitable that would not really be profitable in that original campaign. In terms of search, we also want to continue what we're doing right now. We want to try to make some of the brands that just don't work so far, we want to try to make them profitable. Completely different ad angles, completely different landing pages, send them to a product versus a category and vice versa, because we think that there are some that definitely still make sense and that have good margins, they are promising. So we're trying to basically reinvent the wheel for those ad groups that are not performing, or for those car brands, whatever it might be in that sense, right? as well as scaling dynamic search. But here, mainly our work is focused on negative keyword research. So when it comes to our scaling blueprint, it's very much about maximizing that search impression share of shopping and search, doing that by, branching out, using more custom labels now as well, so that we can always go in. Now that we will have some seasonality soon, we're adding some seasonality custom labels as well, so that we push certain products for a certain period, let's say 2 months or something, before we then take them back again. So with 40,000 roughly in monthly revenue now, which is probably in the 60-70 range next month, we certainly have to add some new elements here as well, because otherwise it would just, stand still if we just keep doing what we're doing now, but don't really add new twists to it. Probably we can scale a little bit, but this client wants, scale as aggressively as possible to break free from this very strong Amazon focus, and that's exactly what we're doing here. Further down the line, of course, we might look into demand gen, a more in-depth retargeting setup, maybe even YouTube, even though I don't really see it here with that client. But that's for the future. As I said, I want to hit the 100K mark first, and then we can still think about demand gen. But this is a typical case where demand gen isn't really, in my opinion, the ideal campaign type to use. It's not a super visual product. We don't really have that great of an asset for those key product, or we don't really have great assets for our key products. So don't try to fit like a circle into a square here and try to make demand gen work no matter what. Same goes for YouTube. If it's not a good fit, maybe give it a small try, or maybe give it like a low budget try later on when you have the funds, but don't really force it, right? If it just isn't a good fit, then you might also give up on that entirely and not use it in the first place. So these are the 3 phases of how we got that store from 0 to about 40,000 now in about 2 months. Of course, if you are a large store, then adding like 40,000 in 2 months may not be that great. But since we had to start from absolute 0 and get all the groundwork done first, plus we had some budget restraints as well, because the client, even though we were profitable on those sales, the client, because sometimes you have slightly longer buying cycles and then the payouts, etc., it's a very cash flow intense business. So they gave us quite the restrictions when we said, hey, can we, increase our daily budget? Even though we are in the ROAS boundaries, the client said, no, not yet. So maybe we would have been at like 55, 60, 65 already, or maybe even more. But, there were these restrictions, which is perfectly fine. And there we are. So if you have a brand either that has no success on Google Ads so far, or if you say, hey, we're making 50, 100, 200K per month, but we feel like there is, this invisible ceiling that we cannot really break through, then feel free to check the link in the description to Cartlift, where we will sit down with you, talk about your brand, and give you an actual roadmap of what we think needs to be done to get it to the next level, right? And you can then either take it and be like, okay, I will try to implement these things myself, or you then decide to work with us so that we handle your entire Google Ads, make sure that we scale them, make sure that you're not standing still, make sure that you break through this invisible ceiling. Because one thing is for sure, if you are just, treating Google Ads like this side thing, doing it every other week or every 3 weeks, making a change here and there, you will never be able to truly scale. In order to do that, you really have to go the extra mile, try a bunch of things, really do the hard work, do the optimization. But then Google Ads can be an amazing traffic source that really brings you very consistent and scalable profits. So with that being said, thanks for watching. Subscribe to this channel for more Google Ads performance marketing content for e-commerce. Let me know in the comments where you are with your brand right now. And also, if you have tried the campaign types that I mentioned here, DSA, search, shopping. I assume most of you are very focused on shopping. So thank you for watching, and I look forward to see you in the next video again. Bye-bye.